The hot desert wind blew over the tents and excavation equipment, raising fine clouds of orange dust. The archaeological site of Black Hollow, located in the heart of New Mexico, was a remote place surrounded by mystery. Ancient Indian legends spoke of something buried there, something that should remain forgotten. Dr. Ethan Caldwell, a renowned archaeologist from the University of Chicago, leaned over a newly discovered crack in the rocky soil. His heart was pounding as his flashlight illuminated a dark tunnel, revealing an underground passage that was not in any historical record. "This is unbelievable," murmured Lauren Hayes, an anthropology expert standing next to Ethan. "These markings, I've never seen anything like them." The walls of the tunnel were covered in primitive inscriptions, strange symbols that didn't belong to any known civilization. Further down, blocks of stone seemed to form a hand-carved path that went even deeper into the earth. "Want to know what's unbelievable?" Miguel Torres, the team's speleologist, approached, wiping the dust from his face. "Analysis of the soil indicates that these passages are at least 3,000 years old, but the strange thing is that the upper layers of the earth have been disturbed recently." Ethan frowned. "Has anyone been here before us? Or still is?" murmured Dr. Grant Holloway, a historian who was accompanying the expedition. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Ethan knew that archaeological excavations were always full of uncertainties, but something about that cave caused a different kind of unease, a primal warning instinct. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring you more content like this. Now let's get back to the story. The descent was slow, ropes were attached, and the team used high-powered flashlights to illuminate the environment. As they progressed, the air smelled heavy and damp, a mixture of earth, mold, and something else. Something metallic. After 20 meters of descent, Ethan touched the solid ground of the underground corridor. The place was immensely larger than they had anticipated. The walls revealed more grotesque carvings, humanoid figures kneeling before a colossal creature which seemed to rise out of the darkness. "My God," Lauren whispered, running her fingers over the symbols. "This doesn't make sense. This art is primitive, but the details are too refined for the time," Grant analyzed, frowning. "There's something wrong here," Miguel muttered, holding the flashlight tightly. Along the corridor, they began to find human bones, arranged in a ritualistic way. Some still bore cut marks, as if they had been purposely scraped and broken. The oppressive silence grew as they advanced, and they all felt the same thing. Someone, or something, was watching. About 100 meters in, the team split up to explore the site further. Ethan and Lauren went down a side passage, while Miguel and Grant went in another direction. Ethan touched a grotesque sculpture carved from stone, representing a skeletal being with an abnormally long jaw and needle-thin teeth. Its eyes were empty, and the shape of its body seemed half human, half bestial. "This here," Lauren hesitated. "I've seen something similar in ancient accounts of cannibalistic sacrifice rituals." Before Ethan could reply, a shrill scream echoed through the tunnel. He and Lauren ran back down the corridor, flashlights swinging in their hands. The sound came from the direction where Miguel and Grant had gone. The echo of the scream still hung in the air when they found Grant alone, pale and trembling. "Miguel, he's gone." "What do you mean he's gone?" Ethan asked, holding his colleague's shoulders. "We were examining more inscriptions. There was a hole in the wall, a dark space. He came closer, and then he was pulled out. I couldn't see anything. I just heard him screaming." Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest. "We need to look for him." Lauren pointed to the ground. "Ethan, look!" A trail of deep scratches marked the rocky floor, as if something had been dragged or had crawled across it. Ethan's breathing became heavy. The expedition had just turned into an underground nightmare. The silence that had taken over the catacombs was suffocating. The only thing that could be heard was Grant's rapid breathing and the faint crackling of the lanterns. Miguel had disappeared, and Ethan knew they couldn't just go up and leave him there. "We have to look for him," said Ethan, trying to stay calm. "Look for him?" Grant almost laughed, but it was a nervous, almost hysterical laugh. "Didn't you hear what I said? He's been pulled out. He disappeared into the darkness." Lauren bent down and ran her fingers over the scratches on the floor. The pattern didn't make sense. The marks weren't chaotic, like those left by a person being dragged. They were organized, parallel, as if something with sharp claws had moved there. "This wasn't the work of a cave-in or an old trap," she muttered. "Then what?" Grant retorted, his voice wavering. Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't want to scare his team anymore, but something inside him already knew that they had discovered something that should remain buried. "We're not leaving here without Miguel," he said. "Let's split up again. Lauren, you're coming with me. Grant, go back to the entrance and try to contact the camp. We need support." Grant hesitated. "What if I disappear on the way?" Ethan looked his colleague in the eye. "Then run." The historian swallowed, nodded, and started walking back through the main tunnel. Ethan and Lauren followed the narrow opening where Miguel had last been seen. It was an irregular hole in the cave wall, wide enough for a man to crawl through. "I hate tight places," Lauren muttered, putting on her helmet and adjusting the flashlight on the side. Ethan didn't answer. He crouched down and began to slide into the passage. The space was stifling, and the smell of damp earth was strong, mixed with a strange, rusty odor. "There's blood here," Lauren whispered. Ethan turned his head. The flashlight beam illuminated the reddish stone. A footprint was imprinted on the damp ground, but it wasn't a human footprint. It was shaped like a foot, but the toes were long, ending in sharp points, forefingers. "What the hell is that?" Lauren asked, touching the mark with her gloved fingertips. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice coming out lower than he had intended. Then the sound came, a deep scratching noise, like something being scraped against stone, a wheezing, followed by wet, irregular breathing. Ethan froze. Lauren held her breath. They weren't alone out there. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence. "Ethan!" It was a faint, distant voice, but it was Miguel. Ethan crawled faster through the narrow passage with Lauren right behind. The tunnel opened into a large underground chamber. The ceiling was high, uneven, and full of stalactites. The floor was covered in bones, hundreds of them, humans, animals, all mixed together. In the center of the chamber, something glowed. A helmet. Ethan ran to it and turned it over. "Miguel!" The helmet was cracked, but there was no blood on it. There was a trail of scratches going deeper into the chamber. Lauren looked around. "Something is watching us. I can feel it." Ethan felt it too, the primal instinct of being hunted. "We have to follow the trail." Ethan and Lauren followed the scratchy path to an archway carved into the stone. The inscriptions on the walls were different from the previous ones. They looked older, but at the same time more refined, as if they had been made by an unknown intelligence. That's when they heard something moving behind them, a crack, the dry sound of something scraping against bone. Lauren slowly turned her head and pointed the flashlight backwards. The bones that covered the floor were moving. Ethan swallowed. One of the skulls rolled a few centimeters. Other bones slid, as if something underneath them was starting to rise. "Run," Ethan whispered. And then the thing stood up. The ground opened up, bones fell to the sides, and something came out of the ground. It was tall, skeletal, but its skin looked dry and tight over the bones, as if it had never been made to be alive. Its face was both human and not. The long mouth opened, displaying rows of needle-thin teeth. The eyes were deep, black holes. But Ethan felt that he saw, that he understood. The being hissed, and the sound made the air seem denser, heavier. Then something worse happened. It spoke, a guttural voice, distorted but still intelligible. "You..." Opened the door. Lauren pulled Ethan by the arm. "Run!" They shot through the carved archway and into a narrow tunnel, hearing the sound of the being's claws scratching the stone behind them. The light from the lanterns flickered. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The tunnel was collapsing. At the last second, Ethan and Lauren dived through an opening and rolled into a second chamber. The noise stopped. The silence returned. Lauren was panting. Ethan felt his heart hammering. They looked around and froze because Miguel was there, lying on the ground, unconscious but whole. But something was wrong, very wrong. Miguel suddenly opened his eyes. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He sat up with a sudden movement and grabbed Ethan's arm. His touch was icy. Then he whispered in a voice that wasn't his alone, "He's here, and he won't let us leave." The silence inside the chamber was absolute. Ethan felt the chill on his skin as he looked at Miguel. He was pale, sweaty, and his eyes weren't the same. Something seemed wrong in them. A strange glow, a shadow that wasn't there before. Lauren was still panting beside Ethan, her fingers trembling as she held the flashlight. "Miguel!" Ethan called out, his voice low, almost hesitant. Miguel's eyes blinked rapidly, as if he were trying to remember something. Then he grabbed Ethan's arm tightly, his nails sinking into his skin. "He won't let you leave." Lauren stepped back. "What are you talking about? Miguel, where were you? Who's he?" Miguel took a deep breath and seemed to regain some lucidity. His gaze became momentarily human again. I don't know. I was walking with Grant and I smelled something. A rotten smell. Then I heard a whisper. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from my head." Ethan exchanged a look with Lauren. "What was he saying?" Miguel swallowed. "It's incomplete." Lauren frowned. "What?" "The ritual," Miguel replied, his voice shaking. "They started it, but they never finished it." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "They who?" Miguel took a deep breath and turned his head slowly, looking across the chamber. Ethan followed his gaze and then saw something carved into the stone. On the walls, ancient engravings showed a different scene from the previous ones. Before, the images showed figures kneeling before the creature in apparent worship, but this scene was different. Men held rudimentary weapons, spears and stone knives. In the center, the same skeletal, abyssal being was surrounded. But something seemed wrong. Lauren ran her fingers over the inscriptions. "This doesn't show a ritual. It shows a betrayal." Miguel nodded slowly. "They tried to stop him." Ethan felt a cold chill in the pit of his stomach, but they failed. Suddenly, a dry sound echoed through the chamber, the sound of something scraping against stone. Everyone froze. Lauren slowly pointed the flashlight at the side of the chamber. The beam of light revealed a narrow tunnel that led even deeper into the catacombs. The darkness seemed liquid, as if something was moving inside. That's when Ethan saw it. A long, bony finger emerged from the shadows and touched the stone. Then another, and another. A deformed hand, dry as parchment, protruded from the darkness. Something was coming out of it. Lauren held her breath. "This can't be happening." The being emerged. It was tall, skeletal. Its thin, yellowish skin seemed glued to its bones. Its mouth was too big for a human, its teeth as thin as needles. But the eyes were the worst. Ethan felt a shock of pure terror. The eyes were human. The eyes of someone who had once been a person. And then he spoke. The voice didn't just come from his mouth. It echoed off the walls, the floor, inside the minds of everyone in the chamber. "You have come to finish what you started." Miguel screamed and fell backwards, convulsing. His body shook violently, and blood began to flow from his mouth, nose, and eyes. Ethan tried to pull him up, but Miguel held his hand tightly. "Run!" Lauren pulled Ethan by the arm, and the two of them shot down the opposite tunnel, leaving Miguel behind. They didn't see the moment he stopped struggling, but they heard it, because everything suddenly fell silent. And then the bones began to move again. Ethan and Lauren ran without looking back. The tunnel closed in around them, the air getting thicker, hotter. The light from the lanterns flickered, then they heard it. The sound of bare feet running behind them, but it wasn't just 2 feet. Ethan felt his stomach turn. The sound wasn't human. It was something running with hands and feet at the same time. Lauren whimpered beside him. "Don't look back, don't look back." But Ethan did. For a brief second, he saw what was behind them, and he wished he'd never seen it, because Miguel was running after them. But it wasn't Miguel anymore. His bones were deformed, as if they had been broken and reassembled in the wrong way. His mouth was open, far beyond what was possible. His eyes were empty. And then he smiled. Ethan pulled Lauren along and turned sharply to the right, entering a side corridor. Behind them the sound stopped, and then the voice came again, but not Miguel's. It was the other one. "It's almost complete." Ethan and Lauren didn't stop. They ran until they reached the end of the tunnel, and there in the center of the next chamber, a stone staircase led upwards. The air was different there. There was a smell of damp, but also of fresh air. "The exit," Lauren gasped. "It's close." Ethan looked back. No sign of Miguel, no sign of the creature, but something was wrong, very wrong. The surrounding walls bore handprints. Human hands carved into the stone, trying to climb, trying to escape, but they were all facing downwards, as if no one had managed to get out. Then suddenly the ground began to shake. The thing was coming. "Get up!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Lauren by the arm and pulling her up the stairs. The steps were high and worn. Small pieces of stone fell from the ceiling. The sound grew behind them. The ritual hadn't been finished. But someone would finish it now, and perhaps they wouldn't choose how. The staircase seemed endless. The sound of Ethan and Lauren's hurried footsteps echoed off the narrow walls, mixing with the growing noise of the thing climbing behind them. Lauren's breathing was irregular. Ethan could feel his own heart hammering in his chest. "We're close!" he shouted, trying to convince her, and himself. The torchlight flickered in his hand, casting distorted shadows on the stone steps. The air was getting cooler, but at the same time, something felt wrong, very wrong. Then the sound behind them stopped. Ethan froze at the same moment. Lauren noticed too and turned her head slowly. The absolute silence was much worse than the frantic footsteps. Something was wrong. Then the sound came again, but not from behind. It came from above. Ethan's blood ran cold. Slowly he lifted the flashlight, and he saw it. At the top of the stairs, something was waiting for them. The figure was tall, skeletal, with limbs too long to be human. Its skin was stretched over its bones, a grayish, parched hue like an ancient corpse. Its mouth was too big, the eyes too human. But it wasn't him. It was Miguel, or what was left of him. He was standing back, blocking the exit. His body was shaking, his bones cracking as if something inside him was trying to get out. Lauren covered her mouth with her hands. "No." And then Miguel turned his head back in a way that no human being should be able to do. His mouth opened in an unnatural smile, and then he whispered, "He's waiting." The entire tunnel shook. The surrounding walls began to crack. Ancient symbols began to glow faintly under the accumulated dust. Ethan looked around. The inscriptions showed something different now. It was the same creature they had seen before, but this time it was locked behind a portal. Lauren swallowed. "This place isn't just a tomb." Ethan looked more closely at the inscription. "It's a prison." Then it all made sense. The ancients weren't worshipping that being. They locked him up here. The ritual wasn't to summon him, but to keep him imprisoned. And now he was escaping. Miguel took a step forward, but something was wrong with his feet. They no longer touched the ground. He floated slightly, as if something were holding him down inside. "He needs one of you." Miguel's voice was no longer his own. It was something old, something hungry. Ethan grabbed Lauren by the wrist. "Run!" They shot to the top of the stairs. Miguel smiled once more, and then began to squirm. His body broke into impossible angles as a black shadow began to emerge from inside him. "Don't look back!" Lauren shouted, But Ethan looked, and he saw the true horror. The thing wasn't Miguel. It was something much bigger, much older, something that should never have been awakened. Then everything went black. The world disappeared. For a moment, Ethan didn't know where he was. The air around him felt thick, heavy, as if he was being sucked into a place that shouldn't exist. The thing came out of Miguel, and then everything changed. Ethan blinked. The silence was deafening. He was no longer in the stairwell. He was nowhere else. The darkness was total. But little by little he began to see movement, not shadows, bodies. People were kneeling around him, hundreds of them, their faces turned towards the ground. Their bodies were dry, preserved by time, as if they had been there for millennia. And then they moved at the same time. They turned their heads towards Ethan, and they opened their eyes. Ethan felt something inside his head tear, as if someone was trying to pull him out of himself. He fell to his knees, panting, holding his own head. "Dick, Ethan," a familiar voice echoed, but it wasn't coming from that place. It was Lauren. Ethan blinked. The world suddenly came back. The cold disappeared. The stone floor was there again. He was on the stairs, and Lauren was standing beside him, pulling him back. "Ethan, look at me!" he gasped, trying to catch his breath. What happened?" Lauren held his face with trembling hands. "You disappeared for a second. Your eyes were completely black." Ethan looked around. The room was still shaking. The stone around them was crumbling. That's when they heard it. The sound of something coming up the stairs. And it wasn't Miguel. A rotten smell took over the air. The floor became hot. And then he appeared. The thing no longer crawled. It walked. And now Ethan could see it completely. Its arms were multiple, twisting like dead roots. Its face, there was no face, just a broken surface, like a distorted reflection. And in its center, it held something. Ethan swallowed. Miguel's body was still there, but it was hollow, used. The creature raised one of its hands, and Miguel squirmed like a broken marionette. Then the thing spoke, but not with its mouth. It spoke inside their minds. "I was asleep." The echo of the voice was deafening. Lauren covered her ears, but it was no use. "They tried to arrest me." Ethan felt something burning inside him. The entity didn't speak in words. It showed. Ethan saw. He saw the ancient inhabitants of this place. People forgotten by time. They weren't cultists. They were prisoners. The creature used them. It took their bodies, their minds, their voices. It made them build their own prison. But then they found out. They turned against it. They tried to seal him away forever. They failed. The ritual was interrupted, and now Ethan was there to finish it, or to free him for good. Lauren pulled Ethan by the arm. "We need to run." The creature took a step forward. The walls crumbled. The world fell apart. Then Ethan knew. They were no longer in the tunnel. They were inside it, trapped in the last part of the curse, and the only way out was to finish what they started. The creature held out a deformed hand to Ethan, and then he understood what it wanted. It needed a new body. It needed a new guardian. And he was the one. Lauren looked at Ethan with terror in her eyes. "Ethan, what is it?" He didn't answer, because at that moment he knew that there was only one choice. And the only way out required a sacrifice. The air was heavy. The walls of the catacombs seemed to dissolve. The ancient symbols glowed red, and the floor shook as if something alive was waking up beneath his feet. The thing stretched out its deformed hand to Ethan. He felt the voice inside his head. "It's incomplete." Its body didn't move. It was as if an invisible force was holding him in place, preventing him from running, from fighting. Lauren shouted next to him, "Ethan!" She tried to pull him away, but her touch disappeared. Not because she let go, but because he was no longer there. Ethan opened his eyes. He was standing in a place that didn't exist. An infinite field of black stone stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky above was a swirling void, like a vortex of liquid shadows, And in the center, he was there, the entity. And now Ethan could see him completely. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a monster. He was a prisoner. Millennia ago, the ancients locked him in there, not to protect his world, but to protect him from the world. He was an anomaly, something that didn't belong in reality, a mistake. And the ritual wasn't to free him, it was to keep him here forever. The entity stepped forward. The voices of the dead whispered around Ethan. He now understood what needed to be done. There were two options. Take the entity's place, be the new prisoner, and keep the ritual intact, or refuse and let it go. Let the world pay the price. The choice was his. The being raised its hand once more. Act. On the other side, Lauren saw Ethan standing motionless, his eyes as black as emptiness. She knew he was stuck on the final decision. She couldn't lose him, but how to get him back? Then she remembered the inscriptions on the walls. They showed something other than the entity's imprisonment. They showed a sacrifice. But the sacrifice didn't have to be someone's life. It had to be a connection, an anchor. Lauren held Ethan's face with both hands, and she spoke his name. Ethan Caldwell. His eyes flashed. For an instant, the void receded. The entity roared with fury. Ethan saw the black field shatter. And then he knew what he had to do. Ethan closed his eyes, and he refused to choose. The entity screamed inside his mind, but it was too late. The ritual needed a conscious decision to be completed. If Ethan chose nothing, then the entity would be trapped forever. The world shook. The catacombs began to collapse. Lauren grabbed Ethan and pulled him back. He came back. His eyes were normal again. "Run!" he shouted. The two of them shot up the stairs, with the entity screaming in rage in the depths. The ground shattered behind them. The entrance loomed ahead. Daylight, the exit. They jumped out at the last second. The entire archaeological site collapsed. The earth shook, and the passages were sealed forever. Lauren fell to her knees, gasping. Ethan looked back at the chasm now covered in tons of stone. The entity was sealed. The ritual was complete. But for how long? Ethan felt something cold on the back of his neck. A voice, a whisper. "You've only postponed the inevitable." His eyes widened, because he knew the entity was still there, and one day it would try to leave again. 3 months passed. The city of Santa Fe, New Mexico, was quiet at night. Empty streets, illuminated signs flashing in closed stores. A cold wind blew across the desert, carrying with it something no one could see. In a small apartment in the city center, Ethan was awake. He hadn't slept properly since the expedition to the catacombs. The newspapers reported that a geological accident had buried the archaeological site. No trace of the underground structure had been found. The world moved on, but Ethan didn't. He got out of bed, walked to the sink, and washed his face. When he raised his head, he looked in the mirror and froze. For a brief second, he wasn't alone in his reflection. Behind him in the corner of the room, there was a dark silhouette. The eyes were Miguel's, and then the whisper came, "I'm still here." Ethan turned around quickly. Nothing. The room was empty, but he knew the entity hadn't disappeared. It had found another way to exist, and now it was inside him. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We'd love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. See you in the next video.